will be the approval of the minutes from the August 5th, 2019 meeting. Do I have a motion?
Second.
So who made the motion? Okay. So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion, any corrections? Appearing to be none. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Likewise, a no. One item of janitorial is the pulling of item 7B from the agenda regarding the Tampa Bay passenger ferry service. We're going to wait till the full board is here. So if there's anybody in the public who came to speak about that, we won't be discussing that this evening. Okay.
Do we have a tentative date for that next? Are we going to do that at the next meeting?
We do not have a date yet, but I will certainly keep you apprised of when it will be.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any public input on agenda items? Mr. Hargis, was this about an agenda item or was it something not on the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Please. You have 3 minutes. Please identify yourself. Thank you.
Thank you for having me back. We want to thank the HART staff and the board for including the reinstatement of our bus 46 serving Palmetto Beach and DeSoto Park, and ask them to approve the All for Transportation project list in item 9A. According to 2pointhomes.com, our neighborhood has a median income of $33,000. We're largely dependent on public transportation, and our residents currently sit at a competitive disadvantage over other neighborhoods in a similar income bracket. Several private developers have taken an interest in our quiet neighborhood, and it's going to allow us to continue to grow. We're set to boom, and we need the board's help to get our residents back to work. And I just ask that you approve the All for Transportation Act or project list in 9A and bring the bus back to Palmetto Beach. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving forward. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on on agenda items?
Yes.
Please come forward. State your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Laura Meyer. I'm Vice President of the Neighborhood Association, Palmetto Beach Community Association, speaking on 9A alongside Neil Hargis. The only thing I wanted to add is that one of the details preventing developers and investors from coming into the area and getting large-scale projects approved is the lack of public transportation. So there seems to be this disconnect as they move through the permitting process. So not only did people who used it not have the service once it was discontinued, but it's acting as a preventative measure for us to allow our area to grow, which is obviously something we're interested in. So same thing he said, just reinstating it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward, we have the Chief Executive Officer's report. Mr. Limmer.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Members of the board. This month's CEO report, I'm going to start with the preparations regarding Hurricane Dorian. HART was actively working, monitoring Hurricane Dorian, and worked with all of our community partners in the Hillsborough County as well as the City of Tampa offices of emergency management. We were prepared for an evacuation service as instructed by Hillsborough County. Our responsibility, of course, is for the safety and health of all of our employees and customers, as well as providing safe conditions that are oftentimes very much highlighted in times such as hurricane preparation activities. We are collectively, of course, very thankful that Dorian did not set their sights on Tampa Bay, but certainly appreciate the opportunity to run through a live drill of emergency management procedures. I would like to personally express my sincere appreciation to all of the HART employees who really came forward to not only do their day jobs, which is, of course, providing safe service to our 35,000 customers who travel on HART, but they did this all while undertaking countless emergency preparedness actions. Special thanks, of course, to our bus operators and customer service representatives who were providing real-time updates and hurricane information to all of our customers. Moving on to the Summer Blast Pass program was really an investment in the next generation of transit riders. It was targeted at students between the ages of 5 and 18 with really the goal of increasing their use of transit instead of driving to their summer jobs or wherever they might be going. In each of the 3 months of the Summer Blast Pass program, June, July, and August, ridership grew significantly, nearly doubling between June and July alone. Total ridership for the 3-month program this year was over 83,000 rides, which was up 400% from the last time HART ran this program. So certainly very pleased with the results there. Moving on, HART does offer discounts for students at multiple universities and colleges within Hillsborough County. University of South Florida students ride free with their valid USF ID. Hillsborough Community College students can buy a semester pass for only $110. Many other institutions, such as the University of Tampa, offer a deeply discounted monthly pass for roughly $48. So moving on to lighting, the LED street light upgrades are ongoing on the Marion Transitway, as you can see from the pictures here. Landscaping upgrades have been made to the Marion Transit Center, and then also the Britton Plaza station lighting has been upgraded with solar lighting as well to really enhance overall safety. And I would like to also announce a set of new hires as well as promotions to the HART team, starting with the new Director of Communications. HART has named veteran journalist Carson Chambers as Director of Communications for HART. In this role, she is set to lead a team of professionals to elevate connections between HART and our community, utilizing a wide range of channels, and serve as the agency spokesperson. Chambers is an Emmy Award-winning national headliner, Sigma Delta Chi, and AP Award winner. She relishes serving her community, emceeing nonprofit events for Shriners Hospital for Children, and, of course, Meals on Wheels. Next up, Carla Williams was promoted to Director of Business and Community Engagement at HART. In this new role, Ms. Williams will be over the business and community engagement functions, as well as the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program at HART as we seek to grow. Carla Williams has been with HART for over 20 years, working in various roles related to outreach. She's also president of COMPTO, which is the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, the Central Florida chapter, and is a member of the COMPTO National Board as well. Carla has not only achieved recognition by the Black Women's Business Owners, Executive, and Entrepreneurials Organization, but as well as the Onyx Award as Women on the Move and Visit Tampa Bay Hometown Hero. And then lastly, Lena Pettit was also promoted to Chief of Policy and Performance. In her new role, Lena will play an integral role in the office of the CEO as the liaison between the CEO leadership team, board, as well as the independent oversight committee, with responsibility for really driving the overall development, implementation, and reporting of policy, strategic plans, as well as HART's mission and vision. Ms. Pettit started her career at HART 17 years ago, and during this time she has continued to hold positions of increasing responsibility. Ms. Pettit holds a master's, and she's a very active member of the APTA Board Administrator Committee and is an alumnus of Leadership FPTA as well as Leadership Hillsborough. Lena is also out of the country as we speak, so she could not be here today. So in closing, I have a couple of employee news items that are very exciting. HART Maintenance employee Sherry Berrien is in a choir that sang the national anthem yesterday at the Bucks game. We are all very proud of Miss Berrien, and of course, go Bucks. Kemley Green, Manager of Customer Service and Paratransit, was recently appointed to serve in the Executive Board of the National Transit Call Center Peer Group as Vice Chairperson. It's really a network of national fixed route and paratransit call center pros to increase collaboration, sharing of best practices, resources, and really focused on improving the overall customer services at transit agencies nationwide. So building on the success of our great team, I did want to briefly talk about our proposed FY 2020 performance scorecard. The team has been working on this as we have been building our proposed budget. I will be sharing this scorecard with you many times over the next several weeks. But I did want to share with you this evening just the draft plan. You have a copy of the actual performance scorecard at your seats as well. It has kind of a blue ribbon on the back or on the top of the scorecard. So, any organization that understands what success looks like is really able to align all elements of the organization to achieve the success. And success is really identifying the what. It's driven by and large by mission and vision and outcomes, identifying how, which is really a lot of the activities, the tactics, the budget, as well as the employees, and really finishing with who. As you all know, we have a very clear mission and vision, as well as a set of outcomes that we've been focusing on. You have just heard about the work plan to really focus on this overall success, the work activities, the budget, the metrics to monitor progress, and all of these become really aligning behind how to drive success. So we've certainly gone through that process as well. Sorry, I jumped backwards. And, I've said this many times over, definition of success is being a best-in-class transit agency driven by this culture of excellence. So we have recommended success outcomes for the board's consideration. Again, we're going to be doing multiple reviews of these. I'm a sports guy, so if this is a football team, this is the success outcomes is really the end zone. So we've built a capital program and operating tactics in order to really find the end zone and deliver on those outcomes. And we've built the performance scorecard such that management as well as the board can look up at the scoreboard and ensure that we are on the right track to score points by the end of the fiscal year. Sorry about all of football, but it's something in the air. And finally, we are creating individual employee ownership of each of the elements that are on the scorecard with clear individual ownership around these work tactics, as well as the metrics to inspire really a culture of ownership as well. So with all of that as context, let me share with you the 4 key areas of success outcomes with you. You all have seen these as part of the budget preparation, but they are the customer experience, community value, employee success, as well as overall financial performance of the organization. And really to continue the football metaphor, these are tactic examples. These are only examples. But think of tactics as the plays that are called in order for us to find the end zone. We've really constructed a capital and operating budget that funds these activities. This is not a complete list. Again, these are only some of them that are really designed to make HART successful. on the screen, these are just highlights of the work that we will undertake in 2020. And once again, the draft performance scorecard is at your seat. And this is really so the management team, as well as you, the board, can look up at the scoreboard and make sure that, once again, we're on the right track. You can also see the scorecard aligns with the 4 key areas of focus and is very much data-driven to allow for continuous improvement and consists of metrics that we are going to monitor and report on quarterly. So you will be able to see the score. These scores will be weighted. Again, some of the quantitative details are located on the performance scorecard to show general prioritized metrics, but of course they all add up to a total score of 100. I'm going to go quickly through each one very quickly. Customer experience focus area, as the board knows, we already perform very well within this category, but we're looking to set the bar even higher. Success really means an increase in how satisfied our customers are across not only bus service, but paratransit, as well as the TECO streetcar on a comprehensive basis. There are several other key measures included in the customer portion as well. The second element is community value, really putting a stake in the ground and looking at success for the coming year, that we will see an increase in positive community sentiment for the value that HART brings to the county. Third is our workforce, and we're really defining success here as there will be an increase in engagement of all of HART employees, no matter their job title. And finally, our fourth area of success is financial performance. We are recommending for the board's consideration that success in this space really comes down to our expenditures are consistent or less than our adopted budget and actual received revenues. So I appreciate your consideration, and I'm happy to be responsive to any questions or feedback. In the interest of, I know I threw quite a bit out here. In the interest of a very lengthy agenda tonight, and to really allow you time to review all of these metrics, you're also, of course, welcome to reach out to me and be happy to talk with you in detail about the scorecard. I know I'm very much looking forward to beginning a new fiscal year and actively delivering to the work tactics listed here to deliver success overall to our community and, of course, our customers. With that, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Limmer? Yes, Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. Just a quick comment from way back at the beginning. Just the increase in the student ridership over the summer, 400%. I'm not sure what that means in real numbers, but that's great. I'll learn more about that later. And do we track the students from UT, USF, community colleges? Do we know the number of rides that they? Because that might be really valuable information, being that they're prospective, many more younger people interested in a transit service once we're able to expand it.
Absolutely. I do know that we track some of the student usage. Let me make sure it includes all of the colleges and universities within the county. I do know we track some of the ridership levels, so I will follow up.
Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ben, thanks for a great report. I could talk for a half an hour on the things I want to mention here, but I'm just going to keep it very brief and just say, Ben, when we were considering our alternatives and looking at folks, there was expectations and there were things that were exchanged. I just want to tell you, seeing this scorecard and seeing the kind of the foundation you're laying and some of the internal promotions. You're exceeding my expectations, and I just wanted to give you some good feedback. I love the sports analogy. I think, we're not a private organization, right? We're public. The public gets what they get, and I think the self accountability and the performance standards, I think, the climate and the tone that you're setting, I think, is great, because we do have to, right, we have to be having an internal check, right, to really deliver. And I just wanted to say very positive. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Moving on, there will be no chair's report. I really got nothing to say. Anyway, General Counsel's report.
Yes, sir. Before we get into the new policy, I'd like to update you on the litigation. This is transportation surtax litigation. As you probably know, but maybe the public doesn't, and they watch this show sometimes on a replay, the House filed an amicus brief and challenged the transportation surtax on the basis that it was supposed to be a, quote, clean initiative, not confused with information that will allow the citizens to make an informed decision. Perhaps I sound a little sarcastic, but the argument was a little less bad than that. But I wasn't terribly enamored with it, but it is a strong argument because there's some support for it in the case law and the statute, but I think he's wrong. In addition, the Senate has filed a motion today, and I think it was about 1:45, in order to join the House brief, amicus brief, and was granted the right within 3 hours by the Supreme Court, which is a rather remarkably rapid response. So the Senate has now joined in the House brief. We are going to have a meeting Thursday. I say we, that's the Defense Council, Thursday at 2 o'clock to talk about response to the amicus briefs and who else we might want to try to articulate in our favor as an amicus brief. We're talking to the Florida Federation of the Blind, obviously a significant recipient of some of the services we provide, and they're interested in filing, and there may be others. We'll have that conversation on Thursday. We're trying to keep this a clean and lean approach, but unfortunately, things on occasion do get politicized. Just to warn you, given that the House has filed and the Senate has filed, I would not be shocked if the AG doesn't file and make its brief. I would hope not, but we'll have to wait and see. Also, to tell you the timing, I sent you a memo. You may not have had a chance to read it. The oral argument is set for February 5th. We come forward from there in order to set our briefing schedules, et cetera. Technically, our answer brief is due September 20th. Due to the recent filing of the amicus briefs and the complications that causes, we're going to seek a 30-day, probably now a 20-day extension. Nonetheless, even with that extension, all the briefing will be done in a time frame that will be completed in late November, early December at the latest, which is plenty of time for the oral argument to not have to be moved on February 5th. I was also asked a question today, I think it was Gene Duncan of the city, this because the oral argument is made on the 5th, when do they make a decision? There's no time frame. They can make it quickly, they can make it in a couple of weeks, they can make it in a couple of months. It just depends upon how complicated they see it and what happens when they start talking about what the result ought to be. So we could be looking very much in the spring before we get an outcome. We're moving forward, as you know, with the IOC submittals September 23rd, and we're trying to monitor that process and make sure what the IOC does is something that is consistent with the ordinance as it's been affected by the judge, so that it can be used to fund programs in 2020, but also perhaps keeps open a possibility we may get some relief from the Florida Supreme Court. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Right now it's kind of in a state of flux, but that's the latest update in terms of timing and participation. Yes, ma'am. Oh.
Commissioner Oberman.
I'm learning who to ask permission to speak from. What's the chances that this amicus brief is actually something saying how awesome it is that our voters voted on something that was so important and critical to the success and the economic drive of our county?
I do believe there are people that certainly share that view and would be willing to file an amicus brief on our behalf to indicate that's the case, so I think that's useful to do. I would think that the Supreme Court is going to primarily make their decision based upon what the statute says and what it means, and I think those arguments are all going to be made. But you know, I don't think it hurts to have people articulate our views in favor of it.
It sure would be nice if we would actually see that happen.
I think we will. I think that's what our conversation is about Thursday, and I think it's important for the community to hear support in the effort and not just the legal arguments that are, quite candidly, sometimes too esoteric to even excite them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Kester.
And to that point, the argument for the electric buses, a lot of that hinges on the all for transportation funding as well. So let your voice be heard.
Good comment. Okay, if nothing further on that, I'd like to point out to you the policy that we are considering this evening. It's a policy that the board directed me to craft. It is a participation by phone policy. This allows directors to participate by phone in those instances when they cannot attend in person. There are a couple of requirements that apply. First of all, there must be a quorum physically present in order for participation by phone to occur. So there will have to be at least currently 7 members out of 13. If we end up adding directors, then it'll be, of course, a little bit different. Participation means full participation, including debate, deliberation, and voting. So you can fully participate telephonically. Notwithstanding that fact, an individual director may not telephonically participate more than twice a year, unless there's an exigent circumstance. The exigent circumstance or an emergency is going to be determined by the board. So just to use an example, I apologize, Mayor. The mayor has used her 2 times to participate, and we have an emergency of some kind that requires her not to be able to be here. If you consider that to be, in fact, an emergency, she could participate beyond her second time. So I think it's important for you to have that role as the board, and the board will make it a decision. The only exception to that is if this board has an emergency meeting that is per se an emergency or exigent circumstance. So that's essentially what the policy does. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to explain it, but I think it's pretty much what you had asked me to craft.
Okay, thank you.
Do you need a motion to approve?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, we need a motion for the first reading to approve, and then, do we have a motion to approve on the first reading? So moved and second. Okay. We have a second by Mr. Koenig. Any comment?
I just want to say it does, in the world of busy lives, and the commitment to the board, on occasion, it is very helpful. All of us were born probably more than 30 years ago. Sometimes the age does get in the way of getting here on time, or getting here in a way. And so family members do matter as well. So even though an emergency is the reason, it is appreciated that we have some flexibility to allow those individuals that find themselves unable to attend to still participate in a good way. So thank you.
Any other comment? We have a motion and a second for the approval of the first reading of HART policy number 210.06 with telephonic board participation. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Second reading will be on the meeting of September 23rd. We have a full board meeting on the 23rd. Which is just the public hearing? Okay, so the comment here on the 23rd will be, when will this be brought up again?
Does this require 2 readings?
I really didn't recall that, but it was set up that way, and Lena Pettit is much more familiar with these processes than I, so it won't hurt to do 2 readings. So,
okay.
And we can do it in October, or you could do it September 23rd, whichever one, because this is a public hearing, so you can set it at either one.
You can do it at that point. Okay. All right. Well, whatever the agenda comes out to be. Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Nothing further, sir.
Okay. I just have one little comment regarding the briefs and so forth. I just hope that somebody from the supervisor elections office just remembers to send them what the public's vote was on the referendum. So.
Okay. I'll be happy to speak with them.
Okay. Let's see. We have our presentations. 1 minute. We have an overview of the challenges to developing. I have no idea. Now I'm in trouble, huh?
Good evening, Board. Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development. Our next presentation, we have a presenter as well as somebody who is joining him via telephone as well.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, hi, everybody.
Mr. Shays, can you hear?
Yes, I can, Chris.
So Again, Christopher Cochran, Director of Service Development. We have a presentation from you by a gentleman, Mr. Charles Banks of R&L Banks and Associates, as well as Mr. Kevin Shays, who's joining us via telephone. There is a lot of talk right now about interest in the CSX rail lines throughout Hillsborough County, throughout the region as well. There are varying degrees and understanding throughout the board as far as what goes into these types of projects, levels of effort, timing, funding, all of these things are, so we brought in Mr. Banks, who's an expert in this field. Mr. Shays is an expert as well. They both worked together for a long time in multiple projects throughout the country to give a great presentation for you today. We know you're going to enjoy it. And then hopefully at the end of it, I'll open it up for some questions for you. And I'll hand it over to Mr. Banks.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, and you'll have an opportunity to ask me any questions that you want. My name's Charles Banks. I'm president of R&L Banks and Associates. We are a railroad consulting firm. That's all we do is railroad work. A lot of our work is for freight railroads, so we really understand the freight railroad perspective, and I think that's one of the reasons I was invited. But we also do a substantial amount of work on passenger rail, particularly new passenger railroads. Sorry, how do I advance the... what do you use? Just this one? Okay. So this is the agenda that I wish to follow. Mr. Shays is an attorney, and he has a couple of slides to address here, and he's also here to answer your questions. I'm not an attorney, so I will answer all the easy questions, okay? So this is what we're going to discuss. The first is the key messages and that we want to communicate to you, and takeaways that we hope you will take away. But we'll briefly go through the primary acquisition activities, which really consist of giving you an overview of all the agreements that would be involved, because as you'll see in a minute, there are many of them. Also the negotiations that would be involved, particularly with CSX. We'll drill down into some key negotiation issues, talk about regulatory issues, and some principles that I hope the agency will be able to follow with respect to negotiations, and then next steps. First key message is that I know that this transaction, should it proceed, will be different than any real estate or any other deals that any of you have ever negotiated. And I'll get into that why later. There will be tons of complicated paperwork to work through and sign, including at least 4 major agreements which need to be negotiated, plus regulatory filings, which Mr. Shea will address in part in a moment. And while price will be a primary focus of the board, I imagine, it is not the only key term. And in fact, I think Kevin and I would agree that all the other non-price terms collectively are more important than the actual price paid. It is critical that the board know what it wants to buy and or operate, and that it be able to collectively prioritize those objectives. And because there is only one potential seller of rail lines in this county, it is critical that you deliberately consider alternatives to buying rail line. And then, I can't stress this enough, I don't know any of you personally or professionally, but development and continuous expression of a unified board and management position is paramount. So let's follow through with the agenda items now. And the first one was primary acquisition activities. I'm not going to read all of these, but I wanted to give you just a flavor for what's involved. I personally think that you should first figure out where you want to operate and how much you want to operate, because in fact that begins to affect, do you actually have the room on CSX right away to be able to operate what you want, or are you going to have to add more track, things like that. But when you figure out enough for us to have an intelligent discussion with CSX about it, we would develop a term sheet, which we'll explain in a minute, which would be negotiated. It's a non-binding agreement. It's basically an overview of the objectives of both parties. That's the third item. The fourth is we would commence negotiation of two types of agreement, a purchase and sale agreement and a joint use agreement. A purchase and sale agreement you can think of as a very complicated transaction like buying your house, or maybe buying all 384 houses in your neighborhood. That is a good analogy, but joint use agreement is very different because you're going to be purchasing track, if you purchase any, that you're also going to have to share, at least in part, with freight trains. So it's very, very different than a normal transaction, real estate transaction. Anyway, there's a whole series of other things here. The point I'm trying to get across here is there are a lot of activities, a lot of steps. And no matter how efficient you operate and know how efficient Kevin and I might be and experienced we might be, it's going to take a long time. You can't snap your fingers and do a deal. So here's just a quick overview of the agreements. The term sheet really sets the stage for the other agreements. It's non-binding and outlines the proposed transaction and the parties' objectives. That's really what's going on in the first column there. The purchase and sale agreement we went over briefly. It is basically very much, think of the housing analogy, buying a house. The joint use or joint operations and maintenance agreement goes by both joint use and JOMA for those other words. This is a much more detailed and complicated agreement and goes outside your comfort levels, I would imagine. But it has to do with, as it says, using the rail corridor before, during, and after the transaction, and how things are going to take place as you step through the transaction. The provisions regarding use of specific tracks and specific switches, and what do we get and what do you get? Who is doing the operations? Who's doing the dispatching? Who's going to decide which train goes first, the freight or the passenger, or when the freight can operate, or when the passengers can operate? All those kinds of nitty-gritty details beyond the actual real estate purchase, if you will. So that's the middle column. If there's going to be new construction, there'll probably be a separate construction agreement to address any new construction. For example, if CSX says, well, on this section of track, we want 4 miles of double track so that we can operate through here without messing you up, or vice versa. That's the kind of thing that could happen. And then there's a series of other agreements. There probably have to interface with Amtrak, and there's a situation of, are we going to have enjoy fiber optic rights in the right of way, or are you? Are we going to get the billboard revenues, or are you? Lots of other issues. I think you get the idea. Hope you do. So all I'm showing here is that the term sheet kind of informs and sets the stage for all those others, because it addresses very briefly the issues. Now, I want to give you just a little flavor of the overview of the negotiations. And let me start by saying that bilateral negotiations, I would say by definition, are very unsatisfying when neither party enjoys no next best alternative. It's one thing to go try to buy the Pontiac and you're making your heart beat fast, and when the Pontiac dealer you're dealing with says, sorry, I'm not going to go that low, well, you can say, well, I'm going to go to the Pontiac dealer in the next town, or I'm going to go to the Chevrolet dealer. You don't have that option here. And by the way, The CSX doesn't have this option either. There isn't any party that's going to offer CSX anything close to what HART will offer. So it's really a 1v1 kind of a situation, which again makes it very different, I think, than your typical real estate transaction. So let me just, if I can, contrast the way in which CSX sells a line for continued freight use, contrast that with the way it sells a line for future passenger use. Now, our firm was recently involved with a group of entrepreneurs who bought a rail line from Jacksonville to Pensacola earlier this year, 380 miles long. There were at least a half a dozen potential buyers of that rail line. Here, that's on the left line, the freight column, if you follow me. On the right, the passenger, I don't think anybody's going to try to outbid HART for buying all the lines to use for passenger rail service in this county. Going back to my analogy of the 380 miles, CSX employed an auction process. They said, this is how we're going to do it. And while our client thought they paid too much, and I'm sure CSX thought they didn't get enough, the fact of the matter is there was an auction, and they selected somebody. We don't have the benefit of that in this situation. It's just one party versus one party. Dropping down to the third item under freight, on our client's side in the freight transaction, economic realities limited how much they could afford to pay. They had to pay, the issue, what CSX wanted was, how much are you going to pay us for the line, one upfront cost, and how much are we going to have to pay you for each car that you pick up on our line and deliver to us at the end of the line. So two numbers. That was basically the bid. And economic realities limited all the bidders, right? But here, we don't have that situation. We don't have the discipline, if you will allow me to use that term, of saying how much we can bid because CSX wants $1 more than you're willing to pay. That's it. You know, they don't really know how much it's worth, and neither do we. That's what makes it both interesting and challenging. And so my bottom line here on this number two is that on the freight side, the marketplace yielded the price. Parties may not have been happy with it, but they did the deal because they were satisfied that they got the best price they could. That kind of approach will not be available to us here. So, therefore, negotiations with CSX will take a very long time, will be very frustrating, and will encounter numerous roadblocks because neither CSX nor HART have any real alternative to dealing with each other regarding a given line. Okay? And CSX interests don't align well always with HART's interests. So let me give you an example. On the web, and with Chris's help, I drew some quick maps here to show the southwest corridors and northeast corridors. That isn't to say that that's what your priorities will be established for us if we help you, but rather just as an example of where we're moving, how this works. So I've reproduced those now on this map and suggest that as far as those two corridors are concerned, this is HART's view of the HART corridors, at least as far as the south, west, and northeast corridors. So this links the University of South Florida, if you can't see the map well enough, with the Air Force Base, MacDill. So that's HART's view of the world. But this is CSX's view of the world. Everything on the right-hand side, all those blue lines or black lines, are CSX now and would be CSX afterwards. Everything in the red are CSX lines that would continue in the future, but that would be affected by the line that is red and black dotted or crosshatched in between. And I say affected by because in order to get between the lines on the right and the lines on the left, you have to go through those lines in the middle. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So here's an extended view of CSX's corridor, and I believe that it is unlikely that CSX would agree to readily establish a gatekeeper, i.e. HART, through which it would have to operate to reach the balance of its network. So CSX may well want to sell or insist on selling the entirety of its Brooksville and Clearwater subdivisions. And I recognize there's an inconsistency between your service territory and what I'm telling you here, but that's why I'm telling you. So here are a couple of negotiation issues. The valuation of land and the way in which it's done in these transactions are incredibly favorable to the seller. They assume that the land to the east or the west of a north-south rail line sells at exactly, or should sell at exactly the same price as the territory to the on either side of the trackage. But in some cases, the CSX right-of-way is so narrow, or it's in a floodplain, or it's constrained, so you couldn't really develop it. It's in many cases it's in the middle of a block. Particularly up north towards USF, it's in the middle of the block. And how would you get a road down there? I guess you could put the roads across, but right now they're all blocked by the rail line, so you can't. So I think the land, the way in which CSX will value the land, regardless of what we do, favors the seller. Second, there's no real satisfactory way to value the track assets. My firm does more of that than anyone in the country. And the fact of the matter is neither the seller nor the buyer is satisfied, frankly, with the numbers we come up with, because if we go down this road, you'll understand it's just complicated. There's no methodological way which satisfies all parties, because the differences between method one and method two are just so great. There's a tremendous negotiating imbalance that exists in favor of the selling railroads versus any buying agency. I mean, look at the seller's advantages. Their experience, CSX has done this many times. This is not their first rodeo. Although it's not Kevin's first rodeo or Charlie's first rodeo, so it's you have some experience on your end, but they have much more. They're a single party, and they will operate the way a large, very large, modern corporation operates. There will be a chain of command. There will be no democratic principles employed. And their profit focus is huge. I mean, they use stock options, and those stock options, even in an industry as old-fashioned as the railroad industry, they get people to produce. So they will be very profit-oriented. They have a private agenda, and the seller can, quite frankly, can afford to wait. The last time I visited Tampa was about 20 years ago, and I made a similar presentation. So here we are 20 years later. They've waited. They could have cashed out, but they didn't. They waited. And they'll wait you out if they're of that mind. The typical seller strategies are power of legitimacy. They'll say, well, this is the way it's been done everywhere. They will intimidate. They will attempt to split or lobby the agency. They will attack the buyer's negotiating team. So let me tell you before they tell you that when they tell you that Kevin Shays and Charlie Banks are obstacles to getting this deal done in a satisfactory fashion, that means we're doing a good job on your behalf. Okay? They will push the limits, and they will, frankly, will try to just outlast you. But all is not lost because, as I tell you, the seller has its own problems. They literally don't know how much they can yield from this transaction. Kevin, you want to step in and talk about your slide is up for key negotiation?
Okay, sure. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for letting me listen to Charlie's excellent presentation and add my 2 cents here. The next slide deals with a couple of the side issues that are really critical. And as Charlie said, and I'll just confirm that I agree with him, that these other issues are at least as important as price. And the first of the two on this slide is liability allocation. And this will be something that will shock you unless you've done a line sale before. The seller, CSX, will come to you and they will propose that in any shared operating scenario, that HART, having paid good coin for the line and having built its own infrastructure to make passenger rail possible, ought to pay any liability or claims that arise that would not have arisen if the passenger service never existed. And just let that sink in for a minute, because it sounds fundamentally unfair. Their view is and will be, pay me what my line is worth, and then when you start up, build your own stuff so that you don't affect my ability to run freight. And then when you start operating, if I mess up, you still pay.
Is this a great
okay?
country or what?
And the reason for that is because they build this assumption into their willingness to sell. The price is one thing. The other terms are another thing. But they have the discipline, and they think in centuries, not minutes or hours. They think in centuries, or at least decades. They have the internal corporate discipline to say, almost no matter what the price, I'm not going to sell unless I can tell my management and my stockholders that we have not taken on any additional liability. Because they will say this. They will say, one bad accident on this line, which everybody works hard to avoid, but one bad accident on this line could be 10 times the price of the line. And so they will present you with this but-for liability and this rationale. And as hard as it may be to swallow, our recommendation will be that you accept it because it's a predicate to a line sale. And your colleagues around the country have accepted it. The one caveat for those of you who are lawyers or like law, they will not propose that HART cover the liability associated with willful bad actions on the part of CSX employees. If the CSX employee puts tape over the locomotive horn and drives the train drunk or on drugs, that will be an exception to HART's liability. And they recognize they're not doing that out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they recognize that kind of a limitation, that kind of a provision would make the entire liability section unenforceable as against public policy. Right. So there will be that one exception, which is sometimes advantageous when you talk with other stakeholders or the public about the deal or the press. You're not signing up to pay for their bad actions, but you are signing up to pay for their negligence. The other reason why we're going to recommend to you that you accept that is that you can cover that risk with insurance. And that's the second thing on the slide here. CSX is going to ask for a very large per occurrence amount on the insurance. $500 million is kind of the new floor for these transactions. Now, it is possible, and that's why we say negotiate here, it is possible to persuade CSX that the liability limit should be limited to a number that is equivalent to the Amtrak liability cap, which I think is in the neighborhood of $260 million right now. It's indexed, and I haven't looked it up recently. There is a point to negotiate here, and so if you take these two issues together, you hold your nose, frankly, on but-for liability, but you, as a business matter, you can cost that liability by pricing your insurance and knowing that there's a definable number on the cost of taking on that responsibility.
Kevin, you ready for the next slide?
Sure.
Now you all understand why Kevin didn't want to come here in person, right?
Yeah.
Just kidding, Kevin.
Right. I'm the bearer of the real bad news, right?
Right,
the regulatory issues, the regulatory issues are less frankly, of a concern. Once you have your deal, what we would do is we would go to the Surface Transportation Board, which is the agency that regulates railroad line sales. We would ask them to confirm our view that the way you've structured the transaction, allowing CSX to continue to have sole responsibility for freight service, while allowing HART to introduce passenger rail service. The way it's set up does not make HART responsible for any freight service. And you do this not because you actually think CSX is going to not show up someday. You do it because it allows HART in the establishment of passenger rail service to know that it's not subject to the very expensive railroad laws that are listed on this slide. The Railway Labor Act is expensive because contracts never terminate. The Retirement Act adds a layer of costs to every employee. Unemployment insurance is generally more expensive under the railroad laws than unemployment insurance under state law. And the Federal Employers Liability Act is the personal injury law of railroads. It's frankly a terrible law because it rewards people it punishes people who are liable even if they have legitimate injuries, and it gives people money who don't have legitimate injuries. It's just a terrible system, and even though you probably don't love workers' comp is better than FELA. And so this regulatory process becomes a very small thing from the standpoint of your strategy and your management. But we go through this process with the Surface Transportation Board to know that on the day you close, you haven't taken on any of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Okay?
Thanks, Kevin.
Sure.
We'll have, Kevin's going to hang around when you have questions. Good? Thanks, Kevin.
Yes, of course, sure.
So here are the key, I think, negotiating principles Kevin and I would hope the agency would abide by. The first is know what you want and prioritize what that is. Because you can't go to CSX without, Commissioner 1 may want to start running service from the east, and Commissioner 2 may start running service from the north. And, we need to have an organized ask. That's really what we're saying here. We need to know what form of access we may want. You all may want to serve. I understand the South is growing very, very quickly here. But there are the most strategic CSX freight lines extend partially south from Tampa. So it may be impossible to buy that line. Same from Brandon coming in towards Tampa. So just what we want, what they want may not be the same. So it's important to prioritize. Your behavior is critical. Your higher offers, my experience has been, will only encourage CSX to raise its floor. So you need to decide what you want to pay for what service and what lines, and then try to stay with that number. Because if you try to raise the number to appease them, you will be as successful as Neville Chamberlain was. Find a way to have options. And one of those options is it's just too much money for us. We can't do it. If you, it's like buying that red Jaguar you always wanted. If you're determined to walk out of the showroom with it, you will pay every last cent plus a penny. Try to link negotiations to items CSX wants. Maybe CSX has been telling you for years, we really don't want to go here. We really don't want to do this. We really are concerned about the fencing here or there, those kinds of things. Get some other parts into this deal that aren't strictly transaction related. And most importantly, don't negotiate against yourselves, particularly if the press is going to pick it up. I'll never forget negotiating for a year and a half in Los Angeles, and the head of the Santa Fe said that the chairman, say equivalent of Ben here, He said, Ben just put a very expensive cart before the horse because they had just signed to buy $320 million worth of rail cars, even though they didn't have access to put those cars anyplace. Because the pressure, the political pressure, is very great once the money is available.
Charlie, can I interject one thing on,
Sure,
on that point?
Please, go ahead.
Find a way to have options. That's a very tricky one, except you have an advantage there, as I understand it. HART has so many transportation and transit objectives that you don't have to say, I have a different rail line and I'm going to go buy a different rail line. Just like with the Red Jaguar, you could walk out and say, maybe you wouldn't walk out and say, I'm going to buy another Jaguar. You would walk out and say, I'm going to buy a different car. I'm going to find a different way to achieve mobility in my community. To the extent that you are able to credibly convince CSX that you have other ways of creating mobility in Hillsborough County, you have leverage, because they will have a concern that you will walk away from their line and do another project. And this gets back to the discipline of the board. Even if you would prefer strongly as a board to do the rail project, you've got to convince some plausible ability to tell CSX, that's too expensive, I'm going to do bus rapid transit, or that's too expensive, I'm going to do something else. And that is how you can create the competition, if you will, to keep those price negotiations under control.
And that's why it's so important. Thanks, Kevin. That was very helpful. And that's why it's so important for the board to have a unified position. That's why I'm getting on that point. Because you can't have two of you thinking at any price and two of you thinking at no price and six of you sitting in the middle, right? You have to reach consensus, whether it's the first time or not, right? Okay. Oh, the last slide said, I'm a big Rolling Stones fan. It said the Rolling Stones were wrong because their first big hit was Time Is On My Side. I can tell you time will not be on your side when the public begins to understand the possibility, as some of these speakers previously were saying, let's get something going, or let's get rail out here, we need more service, etc. When that money falls eventually into your hands to spend, there's going to be tremendous, it's going to be a blessing and a curse. And that's all I'm trying to say here. Time is not on your side. CSX has waited 20 years with light density freight lines for the most part, which are probably not generating anything close to a return on investment for them, but they waited 20 years. So that tells you they're not in a big hurry to sell. So you may hate this slide, but this is sort of the way I view your role. You've got the CSX negotiating, trying to get every last penny they can get. By the upper right, the passenger rail interest. What I mean is passenger rail advocates saying, okay, now we've got the money, let's do this, let's spend this. So they're sending in pressure from one direction. Meanwhile, some of the neighboring community interests are going to, community interests are going to say, well, we don't want those trains here. We want to be able to get them. We want the person who comes to take care of my mother to be able to get here much more easily. But we don't want any trains to actually stop in our neighborhood because that'll create traffic, right? We want Doves to just take all the passengers to the stations, and bring them in, okay? That's the point of this. And then, of course, the press. Even if they're trying to be helpful, it's going to generate pressure and stress on you. So next steps, at least my recommendations are, we should meet with CSX transportation representatives and take their current temperature on what might be for sale and what might not, where they see problems, etc. We should review and document recent studies to the extent we can build on them so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We should assess the railroad physical plant to see what it's capable of and what it's not. Is there room for 2 tracks or 3 tracks or not? Conceptualize an operating plan so we can figure out what it is that we want when we go to CSX. And we're ready for your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I Any questions for our speakers? Yes, Ms. Owen.
Thank you for your presentation. That was excellent. I was looking at your next steps, and I was trying to make sure I was thinking, based on looking at the overall issues, what order to take those steps in. And on slide 4, where you are talking about primary acquisition activities, the second one, first and second one, seemed critically important. For example, establishing the service plan objectives. What are we trying to accomplish? What kind of service are we looking to try and accomplish? What assets are out there that look attractive? And then determining engineering constraints. I wish I understood everything that I should know about what freight lines, heavy, light, commuter rail, light rail, RDT rail. I mean, when we're looking at the asset that is the lines that CSX currently owns that are located in Hillsborough County and also in the surrounding counties around us. Understanding, what those lines could possibly carry, I think is an important part of the conversation, and what we would want them for. I think whether it be, a long line coming from, say, Plant City to Tampa or Brooksville which is not in our county, but Brooksville to
You're talking about
to
in
downtown.
a passenger rail context,
Yeah,
correct?
the different types of modalities that would actually provide the services we're looking for. I can understand that I'm far from an expert, but it would probably flavor the initial conversation with CSX before we would ever, when I'm looking at your next steps, I guess maybe meeting with the representatives is just to say, hey, we'd like to start the conversation again.
Whoever we meet with is not going to be in a position to bind CSX. But I think we should start the conversation by saying, what are your view of your current lines? And go with that. And I agree with you. It is kind of a dynamic situation because you need to know what your priorities are. You can't go to CSX and say, we've got $24 million to spend or $240 million to spend. Help us spend it right, because we won't spend it right. And frankly, you have political and other considerations, environmental considerations, that you have to weigh. And that's not CSX's job. And it's not Kevin's job, and it's not Charlie's job. Mm-hmm. It's your job, and particularly the staff's job, to help you figure out those priorities. But we need to hear from everybody, right? But the point is that CSX is not going to say everything is going to be for sale. And when they begin to tell us what isn't, I think it will help shape how we move forward.
Okay, and then the next items, reviewing the document, the physical plan, and the operating plans, all of those are things that play into, what do we want to do? What do we want to use? So I could see how all of those steps need to be fully thought through by the board and by your team or the team that we end up working with. Everybody knows if we get the surtax, if we have those monies, if we have the percentage that's guided or mandated by the surtax language for a fixed guideway. We have that for 30 years. We don't have 10 years to figure this out. Especially if it takes a capital investment for making this happen. Yes, CSX may have all the time in the world to wait, but we don't. If we're going to be able to really offer a great deal that actually serves both parties. So I think it is important that we, do have some thoughtful conversation about what we want to see short-term, long-term, maybe put it in phases, because I'm planning all that out. It's going to be a little bit of a monster to do. But I do think that it's critical that we do recognize the value of starting the conversation pretty quickly. Because I think while everybody can do the math based on hopefully if we have a surtax, and if we actually start able to spend it at the end of next year because we have to wait until February to get started, or later, that we do consider, at least knowing what we want between now and then. And that would be helpful, I think, in terms of helping this whole group move forward as we look at an asset that could best serve the entire region as well as Hillsborough County.
I appreciate your comment. Let me just add on the item, the third item, assess the railroad physical plant. It really would feed into 3 or 4 different things. I haven't had a chance to address that, so let me do it quickly. First of all, it would tell you what the track, the rail assets themselves, what shape they're in, how much it would cost to fix them so that you can operate the train service fast enough to attract people, right? So that's one item. Second of all, the amount that you're going to have to compensate CSX for those assets should you purchase that segment of track. So that's a second purpose it fills. And the third is it also will help you figure out how much room do we have to actually put in, for example, a second track, or God forbid CSX should say we need a separate track for freight in this territory over here. Well, is there even room for 3 tracks? Could you even build it? So even though there's only one bullet, it actually is produces several byproducts.
All right. Thank you very much for your
Thank you. Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. I feel a little bit like we're jumping into the deep end of the pool here. And I know because I've been at this for many years that kind of the base here, I think for most people, we're going to need more of a, honestly, to any public board that I'm familiar with, I have not seen a coherent presentation on CSX since 2014, and that was 2 years before I was elected, where the TMA had a meeting in Pinellas, and it was packed room, and Bob O'Malley, who was former CSX government representative and who used to be kind of the person, the go-to person on all this, he is now with Brightline. People were jumping over, elected officials, everybody there was practically jumping over the daises or the tables in that place to say we have to do something. And there was this true sense of impatience and desperation that kind of got lost and just went away because no one's heard anything very much about it since. We have a 2012 study that I know by the MPO in Hillsborough County that was never quite completed from what I understand. I've been through and read it, but it never kind of was finished. It's always been in a draft form for whatever reasons. I think AECOM did that. And in 2016, there was the presentation that was made with regards to this regional BRT, which was really not a treatment of this at all and barely explained it, didn't even bring it to USF. And so I think for everybody to really get a flavor for this, including the public, but even members of this board, of the county commission, I'd be willing to help. I'm not sure where, but we really, I think people need a real solid understanding of some of the things that you were mentioning. Just so we have some base level knowledge. And a part of that I thought was also we've passed going out to Sunrail, which is a CSX converted commuter rail that happened just recently in Orlando. And, we could understand the pricing, the locomotives they used, what system, all of that stuff, and how they paid for it. Tri-Rail in Miami was much the same thing, but that was done decades ago, but is operational and fully paid for operations and was fully purchased by FDOT, as well as Sunrail was fully purchased by FDOT at the time. Some of the finer negotiation points, I think, are well worth us hearing about, but that might kind of be more a step or two in the future, although I understand your reasons for wanting to bring it here tonight. But I'm pretty sure with liabilities, and maybe you can, if I'm wrong, but even when we go forward, I think FDOT has assumed all those liabilities in the case of Sunrail and Tri-Rail.
Kevin, do you know that? Do you know the answer to that? comment?
I think that FDOT largely accepted the but-for liability, and I haven't looked at the 1988 FDOT Tri-Rail deal for a long time, and I think that's correct.
And the only thing was here in Tampa, where the CSX tracks crossed our streetcar, became an issue, and FDOT would not take liability for that, although they did for other systems in Orlando and Miami. And so I believe that we pay liability at that one crossing. But to me, it was something that really we should have gotten the same advantages on our streetcar that Orlando and Miami have enjoyed for many Miami for decades, as well as all their operations and all their purchase. And the entire purchase of Sunrail, by the way, was done without a tax or anything like that. And it was done with a 1% infrastructure loan from the state, but the state, the feds, and everyone else, and no operating costs for 7 years. FDOT's been pretty clear that will never happen again. But I'm just trying to show that I think we have to be thinking in these directions and learn more about this. I know we had some conversation about light rail versus commuter train, how that would work or whether, initially CSX said years ago that they would only go for I talked to you about this today, the full lines rather than partial lines. They seemed more open, which surprised me, to the possibility of partial lines. The South Tampa line wasn't available for a long time, now seems to be available perhaps. So I think those are all things. I think it's kind of a predicate before moving into these heavier issues that the community has to get a grip on. And because Ben is new here, and because even many people are new on this board or haven't been involved in this issue, there may be a sense that has been laid before. But I go around the community and speak about this, and people don't really know where the tracks are, don't know how this works, don't know really what the possibilities are. But there's been quite a groundswell of enthusiasm and interest. And our tracks, by the way, do go through some of the best places of any community, of any of the other communities in terms of service. And this is the most, that track in between Ybor and USF is the most transit dense area in the entire region, and has greater possibilities than the Sunrail and Tri-Rail even had from some of those I've spoken to.
If I may, the purpose of our presentation was to, you I'm sure are right in saying that we have jumped way out ahead of where you all are, but the point is, should you be successful in your challenge and that money starts coming in, I want you all to know that doesn't mean the month after that you're going to have a deal with CSX. If we've disappointed you in what we've told you, then we've succeeded, because Kevin and I and Chris and Ben want you to understand that this is a long and winding road, and it isn't. There's a lack of economic rationale that is maddening. I can say that because I'm an economist. So it's going to take a long time. The other stuff, figuring out what's light rail and commuter rail, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, that's easy. That is easy compared to the stuff that we've just thrown at you.
Right. And I appreciate all that, and I understand where you're coming from. But it may, and the reason I go back on this is because I know a lot of people kind of don't have the history, and Ben wouldn't have had that history, and many others. And so I think it's important because there may be a sense that people know a lot more, or have heard, even had one single minute of opportunity to hear more about it than they actually ever have. The other thing is and I can appreciate all the specific nuances that you put here. I know the Sunrail negotiations took 8 years from, I believe, 8 years from day one to beginning operations, which is actually a short time in some people's conception, but 3 of those years were spent negotiating a contract with FDOT, with the state of Florida, a contract that, it's now and that was done it's opened in 2014, so fairly recently. So some of it's been created for us and should give an opportunity to us.
Template.
But a template, right. So, and I just want to, we've heard, I heard a comparison done where somehow some of the interstate roadways, which are decades out, would be built before we could do something like this. But the fact of the matter is, it was 8 years in Orlando, but if it had been done with speed, if it could have been done without the 3 years of contract negotiations that have been done, it could have been done in 5 years. And that's one of the things about this is that, I think it's important for people to understand is that the tracks exist, so it's an opportunity that could be far closer than if we were to build new light rail, for instance, or even try to acquire roadway, which also will have its disadvantages and issues, and has in many communities all over this country. The other thing is that while it's difficult, and I understand, and because of the reasons you point out, and that was very, very good background, that I would like people to know that, because I keep hearing a dismissive, this can't be done because of the cost, but the Sunrail track, and I've calculated this out, and I've asked people to check on me and my facts, including FDOT. I've said it 25 times, and I even think I give it a high estimate, and that was like $20 million a mile for the Sunrail track buy the track the right of way, the locomotives, the stations, to make it turnkey. I believe that was the cost, and just the phase that we already completed of I-275 per each mile was $120 million. So that's $20 million compared to $120 million. A lot of the new light rail, which is decades out, and you have to establish right of way and all that, is about $100 million a mile is what they were talking about for instance, Greenlight Pinellas, which is, I think, something that we can look at. So in terms of cost comparison. So I just really wanted to make that point as well.
So the economics of sharing the track, however they're shared, and that's what we need lawyers to make sure that they're shared the way we think they're going to be shared. The economics of being able to split those very high costs make a shared use solution, whether it's all purchase or partial purchase or whatever, very compelling compared to any other rail solution. That's why Kevin and I have so much of that business, because all the major cities in the United States want to have rail for all the reasons that you all and some of the people who addressed you earlier spoke of.
Right, and it's been done. You can see it all over. If you've gone from the Denver airport into Denver, it's a CSX type track that's been converted. If you went to the St. Louis, I don't know who went there for that transit, and that, I knew immediately, I could tell when you get on it, that's the CSX. I was track converted. I was telling you that in D.C., from DWI, I've taken the CSX track to Camden Yards. I've taken the CSX track, and it was literally CSX track to Union Station in D.C. So this has happened all over the country. So I just want to give those here because we hear very little about it. That it is something that is achievable, can be done, although it has its challenges and it is also has its opportunities, of course. And
I would be happy to come back at some point if you all want and give you a presentation on what are all the options, what are the technology options, et cetera. We did the same thing in Kansas City about a decade ago, just helping them to understand, well, when you say commuter rail, what does that really mean? When you say light rail, what do you really mean, if that's what you
Okay. Thank you very much for everybody. Any other?
One more point.
Okay.
Just
quickly. It's getting late.
I know, and that's really what my next question was, is, you know, do we workshop this? Do we have, because we obviously all have to live within the sunshine, and I would suggest that some of the board members may not know as many as others about the different types of technology. So our next steps, in addition to the ones that maybe you've recommended here, might need to include a board presentation on what our choices are. Whether it be, you know, own the whole line, whether it's share the line, what that really means. But when we have the most recent It's About Time MPO survey done of our citizens here in Hillsborough County, come back to indicate that the very first solution, the highest percentage turnout answer of what do you want to see when it comes to transportation options, is over 80% of the citizens that filled out, almost 6,000 or 7,000 that filled out the surveys, indicated that they wanted to see some investment in rail. We have an opportunity to at least explore that, and I think it behooves us to do a good job of that.
Thank you. Mr. Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and the information. A couple things. I'm going to keep it brief, just because the hour's getting late. But I would like to say that, I do see this as an exploratory conversation. You brought up in your presentation the importance of showing, consensus and agreement, because what you presented is so far into, the process. I think it is important to note, especially for those watching at home, that this is an exploratory conversation. And I don't want to speak for anyone else on the board, but the entire board isn't here. There are so many ifs that would have to accompany, whether the tax were to hold. Different things. Board consensus is one of those check boxes in support. So in my humble opinion, I think that if we're really going to invest the taxpayer dollar, even in just discussing this as an option, I think we really probably need to have a conversation about how the board as a whole feels, because if there's not consensus, you don't want to, go through a bunch of, I think the information is great. I really do. But I think that we would probably need to have kind of like a discussion on what is the flavor of the board, because just because surveys and polls and things, and there's been a discussion about it, where the metal meets the rail really is here on the board. So I just wanted to make a point of that.
Thank you. Great presentation. And even though I have been over the years some meetings pertaining to this rail system, I agree with Conrad that should go a little bit further and get more information. I think it's a good idea, but we need more information.
I would believe at this point that the executive committee will get together and come back to the board with more information. The next step, maybe a workshop, whatever they decide it's going to be.
One more point. So we did vote to go to see Sunrail. So that is being arranged.
Yeah, we've been speaking with the Hillsborough County MPO about opening up a little bit wider, but we will be discussing that at the joint workshop of the Hillsborough County MPO as well as the HART board in October. But yes, we are advancing that, and we'll be taking a trip this fall.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very good. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, moving forward.
Thank you, everyone.
We have the consent agenda.
I'll move the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Consent agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign no. Motions carry. A and B are approved. Approval of action items to facilitate a presentation. We're going to flip-flop them, and 9B will be presented first for the resolution on the approval of the fourth one-year extension to the operator's agreement. Ruthie.
Good evening, Ruthie Reyes-Burkhardt, Chief Operating Officer for HART, and this is on Resolution R 2019-09-044, and this is regarding the approval of the fourth one-year extension to the operator's agreement for the TCO line streetcar system. As an overview, THS, Tampa Historic Streetcar, contracts with Hillsborough Transit Authority, HART, to operate the TCO line streetcar system. The current extension of the operator's agreement expires September 30, 2019. Purpose of this is to ask and look for your approval to renew this contract for the fourth one-year extension of the agreement. Just for reference, we have already taken this to the Tampa Historic Streetcar Board in this past couple weeks, and the current agreement in Section 4 of the term says that if this agreement does not formally renew, in other words, if we hadn't brought this to your attention today or is terminated by the party before September 30, the agreement would automatically renew. So our next steps is to ask for your approval to move this to vote today on the agreement extension.
Do we have a motion on the resolution?
I'll move it.
Do we have a second?
I would just comment, I don't know that Ruthie mentioned it, but this is identical to the agreement that we've approved over the last several years. So.
Okay, we
No
have a
change.
motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we're having a resolution authorizing the Chief Executive Officer to submit the current year the year 2020 program of projects for the IOC. Chris Cochran.
While Chris comes here to give the brief presentation, many of you have seen the draft list of projects that will be submitted to the Independent Oversight Committee by September 30th. By and large, these items have remained unchanged. I did want to state that staff is going to reach out to the community to really take their temperature on the proposed program of projects for submittal within the month of September prior to submitting to the Independent Oversight Committee. It's important to us to get some feedback, in particular around the bus service expansion services. So also at your seat, you do have a comprehensive list of the All for Transportation sales tax program of projects. And it is listed by category, so it breaks down the individual quote-unquote buckets, so you can see the various expenditures that we will be submitting. So with that, Mr. Cochran.
Thank you, sir. Chris Cochran, Director of Service Development, presenting to you the presentation that was approved for recommendation by the Finance and Audit Committee to bring forth to you the final list of the program of projects to bring forth to the IOC by September 30th. Some of this you have already seen, so we'll try to get through this pretty quick. Again, our goal here is really looking at resetting our baseline and establishing a vision moving forward to achieve the overall vision of how we want to move our agency forward with the new referendum funding. The three primary elements that are guided by the surtax is our number one, continue to fund some of our partially funded services, resetting the baseline that is really focused on delivering customers high-quality services. This includes reassessing Mission Max routes that we are looking at bringing back sort of in concurrence with our CLA that we will be looking at implementing, and identifying a number of capital needs that are really structured with a customer focus that involve infrastructure, technology, fleet modernization, maintenance facility needs, and amenities that will really give a better experience for the customer. And then thirdly is looking at the 30-year plan of establishing a long-term vision. And this really includes a major TDP that we do every 5 years. We would do one here only a few years out of the 2017 one, ahead of schedule, being that we have to look at it with the new assumptions of our accelerated funding, fixed guideway projects, and premium services. So the total estimated revenues that are allocated to HART for both 2019 and 2020, being that we are collecting the money as of January this year, is just over $250 million. And this kind of gives you an idea here of the amount of money within each bucket. We're expecting a little bit of an increase over 19 and 20 that makes up this $250 million. And the 45% of the surtax here will bring us an estimated $125 million annually. And the 3 buckets of funding that we've discussed multiple times with you all is the enhanced bus service, the fixed guideway services, and then the 20% that is really kind of flexible spending. We'll go into a little bit about each of these. So the enhanced bus services are, again, looking at restoring services cut in fiscal year 18. That is the Mission Max routes that we have talked about. We have already begun to evaluate what kind of routes that we could bring back. These 3 that we have up there have been identified as some good examples of routes that we would bring back. We are going to do some really good. We're going to do some community outreach during the week of September 15th, next week, to identify exactly what routes we are going to bring back. We believe that these are good routes, but we also want to make sure that we are including the public's input on this as well. And then we are looking at really focusing on improving the reliability of weekend and weekday services, of essentially doubling the frequency of a number of routes during the weekdays and weekends, including some new services on the weekends as well. And again, the capital allocation will be going towards the fleet modernization and a number of improvements. So this is a map of the 3 routes that we've already sort of taken a look at as what would be good examples of bringing back the Route 46 to Palmetto Beach. It's been a big one we've heard a lot about. South Tampa, Route 4 has a great deal of connectivity for jobs. And then Route 41 has been one farther up north in Tampa that we've had a lot of feedback about as well. And then these weekend services, again, showing you a good spread throughout the county of improving weekend services, of bringing these all up to 30-minute service, with the exception of the Route 31, which would actually be brand new weekend service that they have not had before. And that's, again, something that we've heard a lot about that people would like to have. And the focus of this first round of improvements for weekday would really be focused on the core, and this would be bringing the majority of routes up to 15-minute frequency.
That's cool. That's really cool.
In total, if you look at this map, it really gives you a nice idea that we are sort of spreading out the improvements throughout the county, trying to do our best to provide some good improvements for people throughout the service area, and doing the best that we can with this first round of funding that will be coming in. It will require about 56 full-time employees that we would need by the end of 2020, and 16 buses as well, and we do have a plan in place to make that happen. This is a overlook of the funding, of the breakdown of funding here. Our initial phased operating allocation for these enhanced service enhancements for the 45% bucket for 2020 would be about $5.5 million. It would on an annual basis be $10.5 million, but because we would be phasing it in over the 3 markups of the year, for the first year it would only be $5.5 million, and then those services alone would be $10.6 million moving forward annually. The capital allocation for the projects that we have in place would be nearly $110 million annually. 35% of expanded public transit options are focusing on larger fixed guideway type projects. Since we don't have a whole lot in the pipeline at this point in time, there would be a significant amount that would just remain in reserves. Nearly $83.5 million would be stored in reserves from this original influx of funding. We are partnering with the city of Tampa, and $2 million will go towards the project development of the current extension streetcar project. And additionally, we would split the cost with the city on the second phase study to determine where does a streetcar go after that, if it is to go anywhere. We also have our Tampa arterial BRT study that we're in. That amount of money has not been determined, and that funding will come out of that study. And then we have some additional money set aside for additional planning efforts for any number of corridor studies, the TDP, and then CSX evaluation that we just heard about today, those types of corridor studies and opportunities. The remaining 20% of funds, we have about $24 million in other capital and operating investments in a whole variety of different categories that we would be able to fund projects and both service operations, capital improvements, a whole myriad of opportunities that we would be able to fund out of this. And then we would also look at funding local existing services, moving some funded existing services to this category, being that it's flexible, and taking some of that ad valorem money and using that to go back into our reserves and help build up our reserves, and that's really helped streamline the financial tracking process. And also in the presentation here is a nice breakdown of some very clear categories of how the funding will be spent. There are, I think the one that Cindy gave you earlier is probably even a better one to look at, but this gives you a nice breakdown of the three buckets of funding, if you will, and what types of projects make up that money. So our next steps here are next week we'll go out and review some of the recommendations with the community for bringing back Mission Max routes and determine exactly what those will be prior to the September 30th and deliver that to the IOC. And then ongoing coordination with Hillsborough County and the City of Tampa that we've been doing on a regular basis leading up to this. And then ultimately here we're asking that you all approve the resolution authorizing the CEO to submit the 2020 program of projects for the All for Transportation Surtax Independent Oversight Committee for review.
Okay. All right. Questions?
Is this the format that it will be submitted to the IOC, or is it still being refined? I mean, this strikes me as slightly too general. I realize you don't want to be very specific, but I don't know, does this satisfy what IOC is going to be looking for?
No, there is a whole format, and that's one of the things that we've been working closely with the county and the city to ensure that we are all on the same page in what we submit. We are very, very close to having a final format for exactly what it's going to look like. We definitely all have our projects that we're going to do, and I think there was a question that was brought up at the first IOC meeting about wanting some additional information that wasn't necessarily pertinent to what is required, so we're just hashing that out.
Will the board see this on the 23rd before it gets submitted?
I can absolutely bring the final list to the September 23rd board meeting. Absolutely.
Looking for a big presentation. I think for the board to see it one last time, since you're going out to the public, and could be making adjustments
Certainly,
between now
yes. We are taking it out to the public. If there's changes, I can highlight those changes that were made as a result of the public input process, and also bring the format to the board as it will be submitted to the independent oversight committee. So we will
I'll move
be sure to add that.
That was my question exactly, so thank you. I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, thank you for the presentation. And I think the document that was referred to, I think it does a good job of really breaking it down. And, it's definitely, it's well organized, and I like the columns and the way it's presented. If we do have a more detailed version, of course, for the IOC to dig into, that's great. But I think for today's purposes, this is really kind of makes it clear. I do have one question. Can you go back to slide 14? I don't know if you guys can.
Could you
zip back
bring
there.
up the?
Okay, there it is. And it's kind of just for my own edification, but also for those watching at home. Even though the split on service versus fixed guideway, it's 45 for service, 35% for fixed guideway. In the planning section there, I think it might appear, or at least it appeared to me, looking at it. We have 5.1 million versus 750,000, and I just wanted to clarify. At least my perception or my understanding is that not all our planning studies include service, because our service is technically fixed guideway. In other words, we're not budgeting 5.1 million for all fixed guideway. We are doing other planning studies relative to our regular service. Can you just clarify that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. It just because it looks lopsided, but I don't think
understand.
it is. Yeah.
So the $750,000 that you see in the 45% is specifically for the comprehensive operations analysis, as well as the a very comprehensive outreach effort that will accompany that.
And what's the split there, Chris?
It is $450,000 for the COA. And part of that is an origin and destination survey that is required by FTA that we have to do anyway. It's all the timing with it, and then the other $300,000 is for the outreach contract.
So my question back to the 5.1 million. I guess what I'm getting at is that those different line items. They do account for or include our regular service, I guess is what I'm asking the question to clarify for anyone looking at that going, wow, 5.1 million just for, in other words, are you only planning and studying fixed guideway? And I think the answer is no, we're not just doing planning studies for that. Okay. So what is that? So is it safe to say that the 5.1 million in those different line items, it of course accounts for our regular bus service? Is that, do you see what I'm getting at?
Yes, I think what's important also to know is that for the fixed guideway services, for corridor studies are significant just by nature. They're significantly more. There's a significant investment beyond what might be for a regular bus service. And by example, our Tampa arterial BRT study is $2.5 million on its own.
And because there are multiple options with multiple corridors, that's why we get to that number. Okay, thanks.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. It's my understanding the IOC meets September 23rd at the very same time this board is meeting. And one of the requirements is that the board has approved the submittals. So that's a condition preceding to submitting it for IOC review. So unless they're scheduling an additional meeting after the 23rd, and I don't know of any, I don't think you're going to have time to look at it on the 23rd, vote on it then, and then run over to the IOC and submit it. I think we need to be careful.
Yes, it's my understanding that the meeting on the 23rd is still organizational.
So they have another meeting after that for the approvals?
Well, not necessarily on September 30th. We submit our materials to them via the MPO by the 30th, but they'll meet after that to begin.
I understand.
All we have to do is submit it by the 30th.
Right, and you have to
They're
approve it before
obliged
that.
to review what we submit at some point
Right.
after we submit it.
Yeah, the only other thing I would suggest is the 35 and the 45% categories are at least 35 and 45. You don't have to have 20% for the other category. I wouldn't want to cut it so close that you fall below the 35 or you fall below the 45, because we have our opponents out there that will say we didn't even comply, therefore, with the county ordinance, et cetera. So I just would be cautioned against cutting it too closely. A clarification. Thank you, Mr. Smith. So, just to clarify, are you saying that as a body that we would need to vote and approve the list before it is submitted? Yes. Okay. That's your
We
point.
can do that on the 23rd.
Yes, because you're going to submit it before the 30th. Before the 30th. Okay.
Okay, so Commissioner Oberman.
Thank you. I know on the slide it's more of a consolidated list, but I wanted to make sure. I think when I was listening to what you were saying, I was confused, and yet what I'm looking at is not confusing. So I just wanted to help make sure the public understands that is in the fixed guideway that's under planning covers the corridor studies that you described, which will cover our BRT, which are dedicated lines, a CSX evaluation, the Envision streetcar extension PD&E, the Envision streetcar extension for Phase 4, that study, Marion Station corridor study, transitway real estate property studies to probably evaluate where we have resources for not only maintenance but other things that would serve our transit or our fixed guideway programs. And then there are other items, but they are in the other categories. So those are actually fixed guideway projects that we're doing the preliminary planning on, since we don't really have other than streetcar right now, as a fixed guideway product. So I think while we are somewhat limited in what we can do right now, given we don't have the assets, we're using those resources in the appropriate category is the way I was reading it myself. So.
Yeah, and if I may, I just wanted to kind of clarify for the public that it almost looks like it's kind of in a bubble and it's isolated from service, but it's really not, and that's kind of what I was trying to draw out of.
Right.
Chris.
Thank you, Commissioner Kemp.
Yes. I just wanted to clarify that once we submit this initial budget before September 30th, and they approve the first year, but after hopefully when the money starts to come in, that it won't just be a once-a-year thing. There'll be meetings that we can make at other times, so that if after the first year we would want to alter or change or whatever, that this budget could happen.
Yes, absolutely. There will be a process, or I'm assuming a process where we can make adjustments, slide projects to the left or right, make budget adjustments as needed, etc.
And I have a second question, and that's, we heard a lot about electric buses today. And so I saw the 10 electric buses here, but it also says replacement of 40 buses. It's got a price here of $21 million that I don't think would cover any of those 40 buses being electric if you balanced it out. So then I wanted to ask, is that a given that those aren't electric buses, or what is that?
No, staff is currently conducting a fleet strategy plan as a result of the consideration of the replacement buses needed that we currently need, as well as the 16 additional buses that we will need to roll out the first 6 months of service, enhancements using the sales tax dollars. So as part of that, we will come back to the board with a more comprehensive strategy on fleet replacement and what type of propulsion systems we will be, proposing to move forward with.
Great, thanks.
I just want to make sure on the 23rd will we have all of the records to vote on.
I'm sorry, say it again.
On the 23rd,
right.
We're going to be able to vote on this. Right?
Well, they'll be prepared by the
23rd?
23rd. It'll be ready. Final format or final submission format.
Yeah. So
program of projects that you have before you is the program of projects. We're working with the MPO as well as the city of Tampa and the county staff to come up with a consistent format, and that's ongoing dialogue. But the specific program of, the specific line items are likely not going to be modified unless we get input from the public. But we do can fully commit to bringing our final draft to the September 23rd board meeting.
Well, I don't know. We have a motion to let the CEO review it and put it together. We beat this list three times now, I believe. At what point we're going to micromanage it until the 23rd, and we don't like it then? I mean, unless there's some significant changes that are going to occur between now and then. We don't know the final format yet, I don't believe. So, are we tying it? Are we tying the CEO's hands with this? And go ahead.
So it wasn't staff didn't request, or we didn't need an action on this item tonight. Corrected. The intent was to have a. There's an action. There's a resolution.
There's a resolution on the table. Motion and seconded.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So. Just a clarification, if we vote to approve this tonight, then what else needs to be done on the 23rd?
Nothing.
Well, if it changes, I think that our counsel is saying that we have to vote on the final product. So,
and our CEO just said he doesn't anticipate changes, correct?
No, he said there may be changes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
I thought this was the final list of projects. I'm sorry.
As a result of the public hearings or public meetings, public outreach, if there are modifications, I will come back to the board and highlight those modifications, have a call it final draft of program of projects that's been reformatted to be consistent with the submittal, and then we can reconsider it then for approval. I wanted to ensure that we were going to meet the deadline, so I have proposed that we approve the program of projects at this meeting, and if there are changes with the public outreach, then I have one more meeting to come back to.
Okay, so procedurally, we have a motion on the floor, seconded. So if we're going to proceed, if we're not going to proceed with that, we're going to bring it back on the 23rd. We've got to walk that back.
Call for the question.
Proceed.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor, Resolution 2019-09-43, authorize the Chief Executive Officer to submit the program of projects for all for transportation surtax. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion carries. You're going to bring back on the 23rd any potential changes. Okay, good. All right.
Just one point of information.
Yes.
Now that we have the telephonic policy in place, in the event there is some issue with quorum, we still would have, if we could coordinate, if there was a problem with in-person with quorum.
Correct.
So, okay.
Correct. Thanks. Well, no.
Well, no, I'd recommend we have the second approval. What you have, we looked up the policy. Normally, you have your first review at a committee level. We didn't have any committees meeting, so the first review was done by the board, and then there's a second review where the board approves it. So you can approve it on the 23rd, and that'd be your second approval, and then at that point, any participation telephonically would suffice. But if you don't have a quorum, you can't approve it.
Exactly.
Okay. It's complicated. Okay, it's complicated as much as we can. All right.
The budget.
Well, you do.
Yes, right.
We got a lot of problems if we don't have quorum on the 23rd.
True. Okay, moving forward. Any board committee reports? Everybody should have a copy of those. Board representatives, status reports, everybody should have in their book. Any public input regarding general concerns? There's a limit of 3 minutes per speaker. Doesn't seem to be any. Then we go back to old business. Report by Commissioner Overman.
Oh, okay. Actually, I'm going to make it a future issue since we're here so late. I was going to do a presentation regarding the trip to Jacksonville to attend the conference to bring you up to speed on all the wonderful things I learned. But given that most of us need to probably get some sleep sometime tonight, I thought I might add that to a regular full board agenda. So I'll continue that to the October meeting.
Any new business? No? Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.